I appreciate how the first video that I did was so well received. I couldn't believe it. Lots of you all asked me if I would consider doing about a 10-minute video. And so I asked God, I prayed, and I said, God, where should I go the first video? Obviously, I decided to because I'm here today. And so what I heard was a passage in John. What I heard was, go to the man born blind. So I didn't even really know where it was, but then I found out that it's in John 9. It's basically the entire chapter. But what I want to do is pick out 5 verses, specifically the wording in those verses, and give you some encouragement and hope to face this virus and what we're going through, and then also to relate it to everything in your life and whatever stage you're in, age you're in, or whatever. So the very first point that I want to make comes from verse 1 of John 9. As he went along, he saw a blind man, blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Only the very first verse says, as he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. More than likely, there's been a time in your life when you were overwhelmed, kind of like right now. And I think what makes this burden so wonderful is that everybody's in the same boat. Whereas my biggest wandering happened from 1984 to 1994. I think that we're all in this boat together, which makes us feel equal, which makes us feel good about it almost, because nobody's going through something that I'm not going through. We're all going through the same thing. I think it's significant that this man was born blind for such a time as this, because in what he says, I can't imagine going through a problem my entire life and waiting for God to do something about it. And when he says this happened that the work of God might be displayed in his life, the reason he was born blind was to show God's power in his life. So a burden lifts when all the preparation is completed so that God can act. And that's from Charles Stanley. I learned that years ago. While I am waiting on God, he is waiting until I am ready. Now get this, because this next one's going to be different. That was when I'm waiting on God. He is waiting until I am ready. And that has to do with preparation. But when I am waiting for God, I am waiting until he is ready. And that has to do with his timing. So when preparation and timing meet, then God acts. If God is leaving a burden in your life, it is for for your benefit, and it's for his glory, which leads me to the next sentence that comes from verse 3. But this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. He's waited a lifetime. And according to his parents, he's able to talk for himself. He's of age. I don't know what that is necessarily, but he's able to speak for himself. My very favorite secular quote, it's not a verse, it's a quote, says from C.S. Lewis, God whispers to us in our pleasure, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. It is megaphone to rouse a deaf world. Man, right now, God is shouting to us. He is using his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. But I want you to know that he speaks in a still, small voice. I want to read 1 Kings 19, verses 11 through 13, because we all know this story about Elijah. And it says, the Lord said, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. He speaks in our conscience in a gentle whisper. We have to be still enough. Psalm 46:10. Be still and know that I'm God. Be still and know that I'm God. So right now, what better time, what better way for God to get our attention and shout to us in the stillness of where we are. I said when I found Psalm 46:10, the part that everybody knows is be still and know that I'm God. But we are still because of the second part of that verse, and he ends with saying, I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. So our stillness, we are still not to be still. We are stillness to develop that relationship with God and be prepared. And in his timing, he will come, and then he will be exalted among the nations. The third verse that jumped out at me was, while I am in the world, I am the light of the world. In John 9, if you notice, we have the juxtaposition now of the blind man not being able to see, and Jesus saying, but I'm the light of the world. I'm the light of the world. Who else but Jesus can take mud and give sight? Who else but God can take something that sticks things together and open an eye? Who else but God can take something that obscures vision? I can't imagine mud being on my eyes, to give vision, to give sight. But that's what he did. So let's turn this around and talk about the coronavirus. Who else but God could take something invisible, a virus, to make us see him more clearly? Who else but God can use separation and social distancing to bring us together? Never have I felt closer to the members of our church than I have right now. Who else but God could remove our entanglements with the world? Going to the mall, going to a ball game, all of the entanglements to show us how blessed we are with what we have and how we've been so entangled. We see our entanglement when he takes it away. The next thing comes from verse 6 in the passage, and it says, having said this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. He took the liquid out of his own mouth, put it with the dirt, I guess he patted it together, and then stuck it on the man's eyes. In other words, he made clay out of it, which is what we're made out of. We are made out of clay. So when we become a vessel, and I remembered Eunice Wells, this had been back in the 80s, I'm sure, a wonderful, humble Christian woman that I know. She said, we shouldn't complain about the kind of containers we are, because some of us are fragile and some of us are earthenware. That's always stood out to me. And back to the very first point that I made about us dealing with things in our life, we should not judge someone who is on chapter 2 of the book when we may be on chapter 10 of the book. We've lived a long time. And because they are just now starting their journey does not mean that they are wrong in however they're living. It means that they've not come as far as we have, and they may not know as much as we do. God may have not been working on them, and they may not have been as pliable and as bendable as we have been. But the hard knocks is what has gotten us there. So the next verse that stood out to me is in verse 7. When he says, having said this, he says, go, he told him, this is Jesus talking, wash in the pool of Siloam. The word means sent. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. Now, I can't imagine going from where he is and Jesus talking to him to going to the pool of Siloam. I don't know if somebody led him. I don't know if somebody helped him. I don't know if he stumbled and fell a million times. But it was not the mud that gave him sight. It was his obedience to what Jesus told him to do. He said, go wash in the pool of Siloam. So it was his obedience, just like 2 Chronicles 7:14 says, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land. So it wasn't the mud that healed him. It was going to the pool of Siloam, washing himself, and then coming back healed. Now, this is a very important point here that I'm getting ready to say. And Russ King said this, the same sun that melts butter bakes clay. Some of us will go through this situation and will be bitter. Some of us have gone through terrible times in our life where God is working in our life. He's working in our problem. And so one thing that I didn't say about the saliva is God took a part of himself in that saliva with the mud, with the dirt, and he worked in that situation, which is exactly what God does that people do not understand. When we are in this situation, he's in the mud with us. We don't want to hide what we're going through. We want to, he goes through it with us. So there's no need to keep him from not being involved in your situation. So the same sun that melts butter bakes clay. Some of us will go through this and we will not listen to him. We'll blame him for it. And the eyes will remain blind to what God is doing. But some of us will go through this and we will gain insight like we've never, ever had before. God is good. God is great. And things are good right now. And I really appreciate what he's doing. I really do. And I know whether you see it or not, he is working for such a time as this. And he will bring us in deliverance from what we're going through. And like I said yesterday, we will give him the glory. He is the light of the world. He was the light. He said, while I'm in the world, I'm the light of the world. And darkness cannot overcome the light. Thank you for being here. I don't know how long I'm going to do this, but I'll do it as long as we're in the quarantine. Love you guys.